Well, while I was writing the script, I was friendly with David Hannay, and he'd worked on one of those really tiny little movies, The Set, which was, you know, tits and bums sort of stuff, and black and white, and an American guy had come in to do it. And so he was reading it as Mike and I were writing the pages and going, oh, this is absolutely wonderful. Well, he was in partnership with a guy called Jeff Jackson, who had the rights to a type of 35mm process where you only use two sprockets of the frame. And so together they had a production company, and Mike Robinson and I signed a contract for them to produce it. Well, their budget was $650,000. And we thought, oh, well, you know, sounds pretty good, big movie. And then I had some sort of talks with them, and they dropped it to $450,000. And Hannay and Jackson submitted it to the Film Commission, but it was knocked back. And so then we sort of agreed to break that particular arrangement. And I went off on my own to try and produce it. But I met Mendy Brown, who I'd worked with as an actor on The Evil Touch. I did an episode with Carol Lindley. And Mendy was he just wanted everybody in the world to make pictures, good pictures. He just so positive, you know. And he read the script and he went, oh, it's absolutely great, but, you know, you got to shoot it for nothing, big borrow steel, you can't have deck chairs or any of that sort of stuff. So make it for $100,000. And so I did a $110,000 budget, which was pretty low, and shoot it in 5 weeks or something, you know. Yeah, and then I went the rounds, and you know, you had to be mad. They thought you were sort of an egomaniac to think you could make an Australian picture and things. And then what happened was, because we'd been, I might have said the Film Commission, it was actually the Australian Film Development Corporation. And I went back to the Australian Film Development Corporation with a little TV series. I thought, well, maybe I can make a TV series while I'm trying to make Stone. Spoke to Tom Stacey, who was their executive officer. And Tom said, look, we really like Stone. You know, why don't you submit it as a producer yourself? And because Hannay's package had been with another couple of pictures anyway, which he didn't know about. So I'd produced and directed a lot of commercials at Supreme Sound, where Tom had been, you know, the manager under Merv Murphy. And so he knew who I was, and that was once again a compliment. That gave me some courage to produce it. So I came back with this $115,000 budget and stuff, and then Ross Wood Productions. I saw so many people who had money and were going to invest in films and everything, and you know, everybody had an angle. In fact, even Abe Saffron was recommended at one stage, and I remember. So it was recommended that the bikies could control the gangsters sort of stuff, so I didn't think that was a good idea. Anyway, Ross Wood Productions contacted me, and I'd also produced a number of commercials with Ross Wood. And Ross was the sort of ace of the Australian cinematography scene. He'd won an Oscar for a documentary, and he taught everybody, you know, Russell Boyd, everybody he'd just given all his knowledge to. And he said to me, I'll invest so much in your picture. How much do you need? Well, I needed basically crew. I needed about $40,000. And so he put in crew and equipment, all the shooting equipment, and the editing facilities. And then I got the balance of the investment from the Australian Film Development Corporation. Our final budget at that stage was $157,000, because everybody agreed to go up a little. And of course we went over budget while we were shooting, but once again, because we were shooting what people thought was worth spending a little extra time, I said I need an extra week, and everybody agreed to that. So we ended up, the budget in the end was $192,000. Stone really came out of my life experience. I had a motorbike, and I'd always been a bit of a revhead with cars and things, and had fast cars, and I was pretty poor as an actor, so you buy a motorbike. And I had a Triumph, and you just start to meet all the people in the motorcycle world. And in 1969, 70, it was really interesting scene. And they'd invite me to go out on rides with them and stuff, and the stories were there. And I did find this warrior class within them, which was ex-soldiers and stuff, and you know, you just put that together with guys coming back from Vietnam, and I just had this idea of a gang that had a particular validity. So Vietnam was just the issue. You know, it was unbelievable to live in a society where they were conscripting people against their will with a lottery. It was so corrupt. It was unbelievable. And then when these people went off, and when they came back, they weren't even welcome in the RSL clubs. You know, you might think it's bad now with Iraq, but at least they're regular army people. We're not actually plucking young, innocent people off the streets and sending them to this terrible war. So that was an issue that just had to be dealt with, and you know, I wanted to make a picture that was exciting, that dealt with an issue. So you put the two things together, and you got an insight into these people. And they weren't meant to be a representative motorcycle gang, although I suppose there's always types of characters, you know, that ride bikes, but they were supposed to be individual. You know, it was I didn't really go into a documentary situation of exploring the motorcycle gangs as they were so much as what could have been, which was that Vietnam veteran element and a couple of guys from Korea, a couple of older guys, sort of stuff, you know. So it was to try and, you know, hit that major social issue in a really exciting framework. The screenplay was written in 1970, and the Vietnam War was really on. And people were talking about armed struggle. I'm not kidding. You know, you read Rolling Stone at the time, and everybody was getting really sick of the whole system. And you had the Panthers and people like that, you know. And even in Australia, people, you know, before that Whitlam change of government, people were getting sick of the whole thing, you know. And the rebellion was happening in sex and drugs and social attitudes, and so there's Stone, you know, is picking up on all of those things in its way, and registering it. What drives me mad about Australian culture is so much of it just isn't sort of registered. It seems to be seen from an upper perspective, as if it's looking at specimens, you know, in a zoo or something, rather than being down amongst it and experiencing the Australian experience. And that's what we wanted to do, you know. We wanted to just get right in the middle of it and celebrate it in its way. Yeah, celebrate it, really, because there's a lot of beauty in the motorcycle culture, you know, just the look of it and everything, and being on a motorcycle alone, it's just such a fantastic experience, and we wanted to give that to people too, you know. And that was part of, you know, like if you're a Vietnam veteran, one of the guys said in retrospect only 5 or 6 years ago, you know, if it wasn't for my bike, I might have blown my head off. Yeah, that freedom, you know, to get away from everything. There really weren't that many motorcycle pictures around in 1973. I mean, I can only remember the Wild One and Easy Rider, and I think there was a Jack Nicholson picture around which nobody had seen. I don't think it had come to Australia. So I wasn't really working any sort of long tradition of motorcycle pictures or anything. But people went, biking picture. Well, you sort of go, well, yeah, I mean, cowboy picture, you know, the Wild Bunch. It's a bit, you know, it's not just a cowboy picture. High Noon, war movie, you know, Paths of Glory, you know, etc., etc. Biking movie. So yeah, I'm sure at the time, and 100 times, I said, look, it's more than a biking movie. Whether that's true or not, it is a movie about motorcycle club. You know, Stone is the man that introduces it to you, and it's about the motorcycle world. So, yeah, I wouldn't apologise for that now. There have been hundreds of motorcycle pictures since, but most of them are just absolute rubbish anyway. You know. I think in one of Tim Birstall's pictures, like Peterson, bikies come in. And, like, I think Peterson himself punches out about 7 of them and throws them out the door, sort of stuff. You know, well, hello, they're not the guys that I knew. And people were trying to pretend that the motorcycle culture in Australia, and I should say the bikie culture, the outlaws, you know, guys wearing patches and stuff, they were trying to pretend that it wasn't happening. And my friend Big Al had already been to jail for murder, you know, I mean manslaughter actually. He'd shotgunned somebody else. And, you know, it was serious stuff. And they weren't, you know, nobody is a complete moron just doing something for nothing. These people had attitudes to society and things, and a lot of them were really articulate people. The same spread, I suppose, of types of people as in, say, you know, footballers or lawyers, to exaggerate to make the point. Yeah, so I did want to have insight. That was the whole point. It was the humanity of the picture that was about. It was about the people, because, I mean, that was all my training, you know, social realism type of thing, you know. But then again, when you're making a picture about motorcycles and motorcyclists, there's a content and there's a form. Well, the form I just decided was going to be rock and roll. You know, it wasn't going to be symphonic, although there's symphony in it. It wasn't jazz, you know. It was rock and roll. That was us. And it was funny, in 1973, the Rolling Stones came to Australia, and I went to their concert in about February that year. And there I was sitting with 30,000 people at the Randwick Racecourse to see Mick Jagger and the Stones, you know. And it rained, and everybody put up all these plastic sheets, and they all went around, and we didn't care. Joints were going through the crowd and everything. It was a huge love-in. And the Stones came on, just murdered everybody. They were brilliant. And I thought, well, that's my audience, you know, rock and roll. And the other thing was that I'd made a friendship with Billy Green. And Billy Green at that stage was the guitarist and musical director for Doug Parkinson in Focus, which was a top art rock band, you know. And once I had Billy, you know, once I knew this guy could do almost anything type of thing, he started then writing guide tracks and things for characters and things like that, you know. And so, yeah, I knew I could go just rock and roll culture. And that was the visual style, the sort of attitudes, and the musical style. When you write a picture, which is, you sit down and you write a picture, you don't want to limit your imagination, so you write what you think should be. Then you think, how am I going to shoot this? Well, $650,000 budget, you probably go, it was recommended inside the showground, where you ride around the streets and all that sort of stuff. Once you go down to $157,000 budget, you start to think, this has got to be really funky production. So what I decided to do was actually form a motorcycle club and go out on the street and shoot the picture as a club, shooting a picture about itself. Now, Phil Noyce had already shot pictures about the Finks. The Finks used to take 16 or 8mm pictures of themselves, firing cannons across the Hunter River, which they, you know, fired little beer cans full of cement at one another. Good fun, you know, across the Hunter River. And Phil Noyce had taken some pictures of this, so it was a bit known within the bikie scene that you could make a bit of a movie about yourself. So I invented the Gravediggers and got some hardcore motorcyclist friends of mine into the club, then recruited the necessary actors, all of whom could ride motorcycles, like Hugh Keyspan and so on, and Roger Ward, and John Ivkovich, who'd done a picture with Jimmy Sharman. So it was a combination of these actors that could ride and genuine motorcyclists. But one of the guys was in a club, and that's his private business. And then, of course, I was friends with the Finks. And they were a real wild club that were riding Japanese bikes as well as Harleys and British bikes, which is at the time. And my friend Big Al, you know, was a big influence on the picture. He was really the model for Toad, but he was in jail. Well, I knew all this attraction was going to come on to the picture, that we were going to get the bikers, the MC clubs. Well, the Hells Angels made contact, and we just took it as it came. We'd be on location, and various clubs would turn up, and we would do what various clubs do with one another. There were standoffs, but we made allies with the Hells Angels very much. We became very good friends, and with the Lone Wolf. With the Dear Little Black Hawks, we actually took over their colours, which is, you know, sort of something that clubs do. And I had a meeting with them. I said, look, you guys aren't going to last long, so give us your colours and we'll make you famous, and you can be the other gang, and you'll live longer than you would if we didn't. And so they agreed, and yeah, they became the Black Hawks, and augmented with a lot of good stuntmen. They did the scene at the Forth and Clyde. Now, that scene at the Forth and Clyde, the Hells Angels came, but they didn't actually participate in the fight. I had too much respect for them, really, to let them actually. The Lone Wolf did. They were a different type of people. The Hells Angels, we just said, yeah, great guys, you know, watch this. Although when I came out with the shotgun and fired it in the air, sergeant-at-arms of the club actually took up a position and said he was about to return fire. Fortunately, he sort of worked it out. The pressure on us from the motorcycle clubs was enormous. And the girls knew it. You know, when I cast it, one of the first things I had to say was, there is a nude scene in this picture, because I want to show that the bikies underneath the boots and the leather and all that, they're just beautiful, vulnerable people, you know. And a lot of people said, oh yeah, too bad, see you later. But all of the ones agreed to do that were cast. And later I said, look, even though you've agreed, you have a second chance. And a couple of them, because I know boyfriends and things and girlfriends, everybody, you've got to look after people. And a couple of them said, yeah, I'd rather not do it, so we let them not do it. And they also knew they had to ride around on motorbikes, and I told them there was going to be the danger of the motorcycle clubs. And they just stood their ground. And look, there was one story told to me where I would be directing, and I would expect that the club, the boys, would look after the girls. And one of the Hells Angels reported to me that a club member had actually had a flick knife, and he was grazing it over the shorts of one of the girls. And Helen Morse saw it. And she said, "Guitar, what do you think you're doing?" And he went, sorry, Helen, nothing. And she said, "How dare you?" And he went, "Oh, just kidding." And he went away, you know. I mean, that's Helen, you know. I mean, that's just one of the sort of types of things that happened, you know. But we all got along really well in the end. But we had to, you know, we had to stand up. We had to stand up, that was the point. And the guys all did that. And I mean, when you got Roger Ward, and when you got Hugh Keysburn and Neville Overall and a whole bunch of people really standing there, really back you to the death, you know, you appreciate that till the day you die. Well, there was a violent thing. When we shot the scene at the Forth and Clyde, we needed to, after the big fight, we sent them off to we said, look, across at the Dry Dock, which was about 2 blocks away, another pub, famous waterfront pub, they're all famous waterfront bloodhouses, free beer. And so Hannah and our production manager went over to the pub and were buying all these guys free beer. And unfortunately, there was a guy there with 2 girls, and he got into a discussion with one of the club members, and he said stupid things like "fuck off" to this guy, rather, which you know, you wouldn't do that, especially when there's another bunch of them around. So he got really badly beaten, unfortunately. And, you know, they had to take him off in an ambulance. But, I mean, it would have happened whether we were there or not, sort of stuff. But that was the fine line, you know. It was quite funny because they turned up one night and really drunk and looking for trouble. And our makeup girl, Rena Hoffmanis, put one of the guys in the chair and made his whole face smashed to pieces, all through his hair and everything. And it was so beautiful that he didn't take it off for about 3 days. They went out that night and got into adventures, and they actually got arrested. And the cops wanted to know, you know, they thought he was dying. Anyway, it took all sorts of things to, you know, keep the wheels running, really. I did want to look at the script, but I knew it wasn't much of a problem because, you know, the script's a bit impenetrable to the average person. Even if you read a lot of novels, you look at a motion picture screenplay and it's all sort of ECU, you know, scene 29 and so on, X'd, warehouse day. So I didn't think that there'd be much sort of problem with the literary appreciation. And the other thing was that they actually didn't smoke dope in those days. Bikers were all beer drinkers, you know. And you get kicked out of the clubs for any sort of white powders or anything. And here we were smoking dope type of thing. You know, that was the club we were. We were dope smokers back from Vietnam, you know, with all that sort of culture behind us. And we corrupted them. And fortunately, it makes people peaceful. There's just absolutely no doubt about it as far as I'm concerned, you know. If you rev people up with a, you know, couple of tinnies each, well, they get excited. But if you give them a good number, well, they sort of get a bit mellow. So in the end, it all balanced out quite nicely, actually. And, you know, we made a contribution to the motorcycle culture where from time to time they'd all just mellow out rather than just getting badder and badder all the time. All of the cast members that were members of Gravediggers MC took it seriously that they actually had, they issued their motorcycle, you know, which is a brand new Kawasaki Z900, painted to represent their character with fairings and all hotted up and all that sort of stuff. They issued their colours. We had a little initiation ceremony. They had to have their ears pierced and things like that. And they had to ride the bike. They had to keep the bike for the entire period of the show, 6-week shoot. What happened was that they just started to live at the locations. Once we went to the fort, they didn't go home. They'd sleep in the fortress and everything, you know, and light fires. And also when we were in the graveyard, strangely enough, people stayed overnight in the graveyard because it was so beautiful. These golden flowers all came out and everything, you know. Yeah, so people paired up and a bit of that sort of stuff happened, and they just lived it. They just lived it. And, I mean, the funny thing was Ken Shorter, who's the ultimate method actor, when he was in You Can't See Around Corners, he lived in his combi van. You know, he just slept in it because he was on the run from... he was always the outsider. The dear guy, it was tough for him because I'm the director of the picture. I'm supposed to be his best friend, you know, as the director and the star. I'm his worst enemy. I'm the bloody Undertaker and I hate him. But he's great, you know, he played off that and he expected all of that and he lived his own little life and so on. And but you know, he was the outsider, and we kept wanting him to sort of smoke drugs and all that and be one of the gang, but he wouldn't do it. I, you know, actually offered him 3 joints on camera, and each time he refused it the way a stone would, you know, which is really good. And I didn't know what had happened. I just thought, you never know, he might just go change the whole movie, you know. But he didn't. Well, it was funny because for the first week, the crew didn't even know that I was playing the Undertaker, which I forgot to tell them, sort of thing. I just sort of assumed a few things. And we'd done a week of walkthrough with the crew where we looked at all the locations, where I wanted dollies and where I wanted all the shots so they were ready, you know. And on the first week, we shot all the non-bikey stuff, all the swimming pool and the tennis court and stone scene and so on. And I'm just the director. Everybody's really happy, you know. And then on the beginning of the second week, I turn up in my bikie costume and they realise that the director's an actor, you know. And like at first, there was this feeling of alienation on the first day, as if they'd been double-crossed. But what happened was the first day on the set, all the bikies, as soon as anything had to be moved, girls, men, everything, they all picked everything up, you know. There wasn't, they unpacked, they packed, everything. We never had a deck chair on stone. We didn't have a honey wagon, you know. We didn't have a makeup, anything. People sat in the gutters as a bikie would, you know. And if you came on the set as a police inspector or something, well, you sat in a box, you know, he looked after you. We catered. There was always meals, you know. But so people had to go looking for Johns and things like that. So they lived the part type of thing. And there was this whole interplay. Suddenly the crew realised that it wasn't when comes lunchtime, crew first, actors later, because we're the workers and they sit around doing nothing. It was, we're all the same, you know. And of course they got the crew on camera as much as they could. Most of them were on camera except Graham Lind, who was always behind the thing as director of photography and operator. And also there was this family thing, you know, the thing that came out of the Gravediggers, and we had 2 babies on sets. Sue Lloyd had a baby, and Eve Rivkovich and John Ivkovich had a baby. I almost used them in the movie. I mean, I'd use anything that moved, but I thought, oh, that's going a bit far, you know, putting the kids in the movie. So it was just an amazing, you know, the standing cast was 28. You know, 15 bikies and 13 girls, plus Ken. And so it could have been a terrible drag. But when you understood that they could go anywhere really fast, because they all had motorcycles and the girls would get on the back, and you could send to get things if we missed a prop or something. Neville Overall would take off on his bike, you know, and come back with it, whatever it was type of thing, you know. And we really broke down the cast crew breakdown, you know. And I think me being in the middle sort of, at first was a little problem. I was really surprised when I saw them looking at me like this type of thing, you know. We've been betrayed. And it did indicate that rift that can be between crews and actors, you know. Now, the good actors, they all know to communicate with the crews as soon as they can, you know, because they want to. You know, we're all in it together. It's all our thing. And, you know, like, don't matter how good an actor you are in the world, if you're out of focus, who cares, you know. So it's your own advantage, yeah. I think it was enormous cooperation. And when you had somebody like, for example, Hugh Keysburn decided he wanted to dig the hole for the grave. You know, that was right for him. So he dug the damn thing. You know, 7-foot grave. He had to get the post hole digger and everything. He went to the graveyard and dug the thing, you know. Vincent Gill turned up the first day of shooting when he wasn't even called and said, "Can I help?" you know, I'll come out, make coffee or something. Well, the grip crew grabbed him and said, listen here, hammer this nail into this bit of wood. And by the end of the week, you know, he was turning up in the crew calls, he was a grip, you know. He never got paid as a grip, he didn't get paid anything the first week, he wasn't even on actor's salary. Well, he was a grip for the whole picture, with his Dr. Death hat and cape and everything, you know, and really got good. And in fact, Rosswood wanted to hire him after the picture. Then, for example, Vincent came every day to the editing room, Vincent. He sat in the corner of the editing room, watched every cut. And then he even turned up in Melbourne for the music recording for a couple of sessions one weekend, you know. And Helen Morse, who was this enormous star of the stage and the screen, she was wardrobe supervisor as well, you know, no salary, of course. So she was fixing up the costumes and, you know, she had a major part in selecting costumes even, because what I did was I said, bring what you've got and I'll replace it type of thing. So most of the wardrobe, you know, people's own clothes and things like that. And Helen would filter it all and I'd just have to say, yeah, good, you know. So everybody was crossing over, if you understand. And it wasn't as if it was a sacrifice. Everybody wanted to do that, you know. Why wouldn't you? I mean, as a director, there's so much you just stand around and you go, oh, you know, shoot this, and that takes an hour to do it. Well, you might as well get in and help. you know, dig a bit of a hole or something rather than just... And the actors, normally you just sit in your trailer or something, playing cards. These people are all out totally involved, you know. Maybe holding back a few bikies or... In fact, when the police, every day the police arrived and they wanted to arrest us and stuff, you know. And I had a contact in the police department called Detective Sergeant Ken Barret, who'd gone to my old school, Sydney High School. So I had the old school tie going for him. And he was in the public relations department. So every time the police turned up, I'd just go, no, we've arranged this through Ken Barret of the PR department. And they say, you've arranged to race motorbikes on a public street? And I go, yeah. And then, like, the girls would drift over and they go, oh, you're real policemen and stuff. We thought you were only actors because you're so good looking, you know. Or whatever. And the cops would be going, oh, well, and they go, oh, is that a real gun? You know, this sort of stuff, people working all the time, whatever the circumstances were, you know. And they all got very good at it. And I could have made it as a sort of medium shot, wide shot, close-up type of picture, but I mean, I'd shot a lot of commercials, and I'd actually lost the fear of film, if you know what I mean. I'd shot so much footage that I wasn't worried on the set. And I'd worked as an actor on with so many different directors, and Crawford's Productions, low budget, shooting 16mm from the hip practically, you know. And I just knew Graham was so great that he could practically shoot, you know, so fast. I mean, Graham worked at a higher quality. Graham Lind worked at a higher quality from the first day than I expected. And I'd say, look, I want this, I want that. And he'd go, okay. And it'd take an hour to set up. And I'd go, you know, I don't want to spend quite so much time. Graham was shooting what he had to shoot, if you understand what I mean. No director in the world was going to make Graham shoot a shot that wasn't ready. So I just had to adapt to Graham. But then I found out what he could do as the rushes started coming in, you know. So I was prepared to spend a little longer and so on, you know. But with a picture like Stone, there are no rules. I mean, I had other pictures that I would have liked to have made, like Ben Hall was a good subject, and also I had a sort of sensitive South Coast modern young child story type of thing, you know. And you'd shoot that quite differently. But Stone was a particular subject, and if it dragged in its particular style. And as I say, Billy Green was a lot to do with that. Billy Green's music and attitude and so on. And the input of all the people. The freedom we got on the set was because of how good everybody was, if you know what I mean. Not me, everybody else. I felt that most of the time, for example, towards the end of the picture, I wasn't even looking through the camera at the shots. You know, you start off, oh, you know, quarter of an inch to the left, and oh, and, you know, a bit further here in the first inch, you know. And then, like Graham, every shot that he ever shot was much better than I expected, you know. And I remember when we started to shoot, he said, what's our basic colour? And I said, well, tan summer skin. He goes, okay, what sort of lens do you want? I went, longest as possible. You know, I want to compress. What sort of exposure? Just on the side of under, you know, so we can get the deep shadows and the deep colours. I don't want that washed out Hollywood look and so on. We worked through all that sort of stuff. And I could honestly say towards the end of the picture, I didn't have to check Graham shot. You know, whether they'd... I'd just go, yeah, well, you know, start with Ken and we'll move around to here and so on, and we'll be wide enough to see the other guys. And they'd set it up, you know. That doesn't often happen with directors. But on the other hand, I didn't have to act the director, you know. I didn't have to run around with a thing around my neck and stuff pretending I had a job. I had a crew that'd do all that. I mean, what am I going to tell Graham Lind how to expose, you know? Am I going to tell Vincent Gill how to act, or Helen Morse? You just go, great. You know what I mean? You just set it up and let it all go, sort of stuff. And the input, I mean, Ian Barry, the work he did as an editor, he edited the whole thing himself. He didn't have an assistant. It was just me standing in the editing room, you know, moving all this 100,000 feet, 35 mil from place to place. He didn't even have a sound editor. I mean, Ian did all the sound editing. By the time we got to the sound editing, he had an assistant, which was Thomas Picorni, who did a really good job, you know. I don't think anybody's ever done that much work on a 100-minute feature film without an assistant. You know, it doesn't sound possible. I'd shoot 30-second commercials with 2 assistants, if you know what I mean. But Ian just did the work. And some of the sequences are completely his. The swimming sequences, I just left him to cut. I took one little bit out of it, and that was it, you know. So it was a matter of hiring a lot of people that I thought were experts and letting them do their work. Cliff Curl was sound recordist. We only dubbed about 3 minutes of the whole picture. You know, location, complete location picture, complete location. And it's all 100% recorded sound, except a little bit in the Ken Shorter scene with Amanda, and yeah, little bits here and there. And I remember once Cliff said to me when we were shooting the scene in the big circle, he said to me, oh, look, you know, come and listen to this, I can't get it quite right type of thing, you know. So I said, I'll do a rehearsal, I'll just listen. And so I put on the cans, and the sound was fantastic. It was just, it had that little phase that was coming off those rocks and everything. And it was where Cliff had located the mic that was perfect, you know. It could have been 40 places around that and it wouldn't have got that exact sound. And I was just like this. I was going, oh, Cliff. And I looked up and he's going, yes, yes. You know, he just wanted me to know how hard he was working too, you know. Because, I hate to say it, you know, on film, sound, pain in everybody's ass, you know. You set up a great picture and then these buggers are trying to stick their microphone in, make it hard for everybody, you know. And, yeah, Cliff, this brilliant sound recordist, you don't tell any of those people really what to do, you just let them out, you know what I mean? There was a lot of scandal about the drug use on Stone. I'm sure if somebody came to the set of Stone, they'd see people looking around, looking as if they were smoking joints, and if it was hot, you know, there'd be a tinny, you know. A lot of it was, yeah, sure, you know, it wasn't a problem. I wasn't actually going to say to people, look, you know. But at one stage it did become a problem because people were getting a bit stoned. And I banned the use of dope on the set. I mean, and now it sounds absolutely ridiculous to actually have to... But it was a radical picture, you know. And, I mean, Graham Lind wasn't smoking dope or anything like that, you know. But maybe, you know, after we'd wrapped, some of the crew would have a joint. The crew were just working too hard. There's no doubt about that. And people like Rebecca, even though she says she was stoned, Rebecca was incredibly professional. And not only that, Rebecca would sort of back me up as like the Undertaker. As I'd have little confrontations with people that had nothing to do with the picture, say, Rebecca would be there, you know, and she's just an amazing person. So we wanted that attitude, that it was free and easy, we were radicals, we didn't worry about, you know, things like that. But it's just the same as, you know, drinking. you can either hold a tinny in your hand all day sort of stuff, you know, or a shandy even, or you can drink hardcore, you know, bourbon or something straight, and it's going to make a difference. So it was more that it wasn't banned. I did ban it, as I said, which was quite funny. And then all the gravediggers went all mean. They're all surly, you know. And it was just like being the Undertaker. I had to, you know, shout at them and everything. And so after a couple of days, I sort of didn't mention it anymore, and they became more discreet, that's all, you know. Even in those days, bikies did like to have big funerals. I mean, they do, you know, they respect one another, and if one club loses a member or something, a couple of the other clubs will turn up to support it. So I had my 15 Gravedigger motorcycles, and I had the beautiful, what is now the F3 freeway, the Gosford Freeway, which I, you know, was just stunned at how beautiful it was. It only opened for a couple of years. And so I wanted to get as many motorcyclists as I could. And this was where working with Rosswood Productions was really handy, because it was a cameraman studio. And Ross was able to get like 6 camera operators. And you can't really, this is where good people are good. You cannot find 6 camera positions up and down the Gosford Freeway in a sort of, it's about 30k length that we used. You just have to let them go out there with the production manager, find a spot each, and shoot it as it goes by. That was all I could say, really, you know. And all of these guys are just fantastic operators. And we had the camera car, which had square wheels, unfortunately. I mean, the camera car was just a beat-up old ute, unfortunately. And so, you know, we didn't use a lot of footage because it was so bumpy. And on the day I put, well, not on the day, about 2 weeks before, I put an ad in, a free ad in one of the motorcycle magazines called Rev's Motorcycle Magazine. And it just said, on the second Saturday in December, we'll be shooting a scene for the motorcycle movie Stone, and if you have a bike over 500cc and you want to take part, turn up. So we were hoping for 50 or 60 or something like that, and 400 turned up. And it was just, it was one of the great validifications of the picture, you know, that the word had got out, that what we were doing was right and everything, you know. And a bunch of the clubs turned up, and everybody, by then I had a bullhorn. I was trying to direct the picture for about 3 weeks without a bullhorn, and the camera crew went out and hired me one. So I was able to sort of talk to all these 400 bikies and tell them what we wanted and everything. And they were just amazing. They were just like professional actors. They, you know, as I spoke, I could see all their eyes focused on me and stuff, you know. And the way they moved the bikes out and everything, it's really hard. I mean, to move that many motorcycles and things. And we did 2 runs up and back, and they were flawless. And the police really cooperated. The police said that we couldn't do it. And I told them I was going to have this procession, and they said, no, you can't do it. We're not going to, you know, encourage motorcycle gangs. So I rang them on the Thursday and said, well, we're doing it on Saturday. And so they turned up with a bunch of cars and just cooperated and did everything right and blocked off the highway and so on. And at the end of the run, they were still there and all the bikers were there, and I got up and I went, you know, I want to thank you for what you've done, and I want to thank the cops too for how good they were. And all the bikers cheered the cops, and all the cops felt good, you know, and off we went. Peter Armstrong's stunt in Stone is the most amazing thing I've ever seen any human being ever do. Peter was, he was just so brave. That was the point. I wrote this scene and I thought 20-foot cliff. You know, I thought 20 foot. If I can find a bloke that can ride a bike 20 feet off, and I knew Peter would do it. You know, Peter was such a star, a stuntman, you know. He'd been all the way back to stuff like Cobb & Co., you know, and Riptide and everything. And he'd done all these fantastic stunts live, not like the Hollywood stuff, you know. And I couldn't find a cliff. And so I postponed the shot. You know, it was supposed to be shot within the 6-week shooting period. And anyway, I went all around the harbour looking for locations and things. And finally Peter rang me up. And he said, oh, I found the location. And I went, oh, great. So we jumped in his Valiant. We drove out to Maroubra and we went out to this, you know, headland. And I'd been there, you know, looking for cliffs. And I said, well, where's the cliff? And he said, this is it. I looked down and I thought it was 80 feet, you know, and not only that, there were rocks at the bottom of the cliff. It was about 20 feet out before there was even any water. And I just went right off here, and he went, yeah, I can do it. And he walked to the edge and looked over, you know, I was standing back about 4 feet. I said, not in my movie, nobody's going to kill themselves on my movie. And he went, I can do it. And I said, no, Peter, you can't. And he said, Sandy, you know, this is my life. This is it. I can do this. All my life I've waited for this. Give it to me. Give it to me. So, you know, I went, okay, I'm going to give you 2% of the picture so you'll stay alive, you know. And anyway, so when we shot it, I mean, I'd worked on a stunt with Peter before. He knew Fear, Peter. He'd done a double for me on Colour Me Dead where he had to put on my suit and fall off a balcony 2 floors into it. And as I was putting the coat on Peter, taking it off me and putting it on him, he was shivering with fear. Fear. This brilliant, fabulous stuntman was like this. And I thought, God, what's going on? And then he beat it. He went through the process, and it just went. And he became this person, this stuntman, you know. And the fear that to do that stunt. Anyway, he had to ride down only about a 40-foot ramp, get up sufficient speed on this bike to clear 20 feet of rocks at the bottom, fall 80 feet into the water and survive. Well, it knocked him out. He went underwater. Underwater, somehow or other, he took off the helmet, which didn't have a strap, came up to the surface, rolled over on his back, and by the time the rescue boat was there, he was floating free on the water. And the number of skills that went into it, the timing as he went down the ramp, because he had to actually jump off the bike while it was still on the ramp, because if he'd tried to jump off in the air, well, they wouldn't have separated, and if they'd landed together, it would have been squashed. Anyway, he was in the hospital that afternoon, but they let him out. And 2 days later, when he came in for the rushes, he was just a human bruise. He just impacted that water from 80 feet. I honestly believe it just would have broken my back. You know, and I was fit, but he was so strong. And the other thing is that Peter actually told me that he did have nightmares for the rest of his life. It is major trauma to go through something like that. That moment of incredible fear, of death, you know, absolute death, and fighting. You could hear it on the soundtrack, as he's fighting through the air to get clear of the bike and turn over so he can land flat on the water and not spear in and hit the water underneath. It was just the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. The ending of the picture is probably not so much a matter of bikie law, it's a matter of reverse morality. Because it's a question when I speak to audiences after screenings and things, there's always somebody who sort of says, why do they kick stone? And usually I say, well, is there anybody here in the audience that has an idea why they did that? And usually there is, fortunately, because a lot of people spend a lot of time working it out, you know. It's not, we hope, your usual ending. And the point is that he actually threatens to kill them. He threatens to kill them. I mean, I've stood in front of that guy while he aimed a machine gun at me and said, I'll kill you. And I looked into Stone's eyes and I knew he would. That's what I thought. That's what the Undertaker thinks. Otherwise, we'd just push him aside and we'd just put that guy up against a tree and shoot him, you know. And we thought that he'd kill us. We believed that. So we backed off. It wasn't worth it, you know. And that's a terrible betrayal. A terrible betrayal, you know. And we didn't threaten him with death or anything, you know. And we caught the guy. All of this sort of stuff. Now, from Stone's point of view, after he gets his kicking, he works it out. He could have done other things. He didn't have to do that. He might have said, well, you'll have to kill me too. You know, he might have said, we can talk about this. You guys will all go to jail for 20 years. It's not worth it. But he said, I'll kill you. He did that reflex cop thing, which everybody in the audience accepts. Right, you know, you've got to look after your prisoner. You can't let any... This guy's a piece of scum. You don't kill for him. You've got to Jen, you've got to get your morality to fit, if you understand what I mean, you know. So it challenges conventional morality, and he understands that he was wrong. And he goes, okay, that's right, I broke the court, I got a kicking, I deserved it, I'll take it. And that's where the end of it goes. And he forgives, you know. This is the whole thing that, you know, my training is to try and send the audience out a better audience than they came in, not a worse audience, not to give them sadism or something or vengeance. The vengeance doesn't work. He wins. Stone wins. He takes it, you know. And people have said to me, well, what did the gravediggers think about Stone later? And I say, well, we think he's great. We work it out. We go, yeah, he made his mistake, he took his kicking and kept his mouth shut. Top dude. The opening night of Stone, we had, you know, 200% acceptances of the invitations. And everybody wanted to be there. It was just a fantastic night. I did make a little mistake in that I did invite the bikers, which I had to, you know, it was their night. So down there was 100 or so of them, and they made a lot of noise in the 900-seat forum, you know. And I've got to say that I think they frightened the poor little critics. I think the critics were used to being in the foyer, you know, and talking to one another and stuff, and they weren't used to 230-pound guy standing there with his ear, you know, sort of with snails crawling on him and stuff, you know, and saying, rah, 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 rah. I really think they were sort of monstered by the picture. I think they did think, oh, this is the bad guys coming over. And because they didn't have the understanding that the picture might have any more than a pure exploitative purpose, they didn't engage in it. They just sat there and watched it. And so when the ending came and so on, they didn't try to figure it out. They just went, you know, like the bikie rules win and the guy just gets kicked and they ride off into the sunset victorious and we're all squares or something, you know. So unanimously, except for Matt White and the Daily Mirror, good on you, Matt, great, they just condemned it, you know. And in fact, one of them, the front page of the Telegraph said, you know, boos and jeers for bikie film. As if the audience booed it, you know, like, that's just a lie. You know, they went crazy for it, you know. I mean, if there was a boo, it was for the bad guy type of thing, you know, and anybody knew that. Yeah, so I wasn't all that surprised. I'd always expected, you know, they wouldn't get it. Because we were looking for the really hip audience. We were looking, you know, for the Rolling Stone audience, the rock audience, the rock and roll audience, the rebels, you know, the ones that wanted to change things. Somebody said to me, oh, look, you know, most of them over 30, you know, it's too late. Too late. No matter what you say, they're on their path. Under 30, that was the idea at the time, if you remember. You can't trust anybody under 30. So we were just trying to change things and looking for people that had changed things. And we knew the ones that were sort of sitting happily on society and sending people off to Vietnam and avoiding their taxes wouldn't like it, you know. And they didn't. And we didn't care because we broke all the box office records around the country and everything. And that made them even madder. That made them go, oh, maybe it wasn't that they said it's a flop, for example. Well, you can say it's a bad picture, but you can't actually say it's a flop on the opening night. Unless people were walking out, you know, well, they certainly weren't. So the fact that it was such a smash hit really made them hate even more type of thing, you know. If you're going into new territory, you've got to expect that the old people aren't going to like it. I don't mean old in age, but the people that support the old order. And certainly Stone was nothing like anything that had come out of Australian cinema. I mean, Barry and all those pictures, you know, they're all wide shot, close up. There wasn't all the montage and powerful rock and roll and blood and guts and stuff coming through the screen that Stone had. Or the uncompromised things. I mean, you know, for all it's worth, both of those pictures used tits to sort of exploitative effect. When we did a swimming scene, it was just exactly as it happened. You know, we just said, oh, well, you want to go for a swim? We all went for a swim, you know. There was no turn left and, you know, right or anything like that. It was just people doing it, you know. And we had genitalia on display, you know. I mean, the pendulum has swung back again now with the radical religions, or sort of everybody, radical Christians and everything. Everybody's, you know, going back into the Dark Ages. So that always happens, you know, these little shifts and so on. But for a while there, I think there was a bit of radical art happening in Australia, but not at the moment. The only picture I think that was in the Stone League, and I don't mean big-time league, but Stone area, which was social relevance, is Romper Stomper. I thought that had a lot going for it. And it got the same criticism. The critics actually said that Romper Stomper was a celebration of skinheads. You know, like, anybody walking out of seeing Romper Stomper, you'd give them $1 million and they wouldn't be a skinhead, sissy or skinhead. And no, I don't think so. I think people have only picked up the wrong ideas, you know. Maybe they thought action would work, you know, and that's not the point of Stone. Action, it's an exciting milieu, you know. If you're making a picture about Lawrence of Arabia, you can't pretend, you know, you didn't do various things and stuff. If you're making a picture about cowboys, well, you know, you're not going to take the moments where they're all sitting watching the grass grow. You're going to get the stampedes and the fights and everything, you know. So I thought it was a relevant social issue, motorcycle gangs, and wanted to make an accurate rock and roll attitude picture about it. And I can't see anything. I suppose Caddy was had nothing to do with Stone. Would have happened, no. But once again, it had a certain social relevance. I like Caddy. I think it's a good picture. But yeah, I think only Romper Stomper picked up in that sort of area. The other pictures, they're just like sadism. You know, they think the audience likes to see people get hurt. I don't think they do. Some do, but, you know, they end up in jail. I think I was the luckiest director in the history of the world, really. I had a good script, which I wasn't lucky about, because that's hard work. And I cast well. You know, I really cast well. And my crew, you know, some of them my absolute best friends, and for life, you know. They were then, and they always will be. And some of them are deceased. Brian Bansgrove, just the greatest gaffer in the world, and proved that. You know, I'm really proud that I think his first picture was Stone. And Geordie Dryden, our grip, who's dead, and Graham Lind, and Peter Armstrong, all those fantastic, heroic people, you know, who not only did a brilliant job, but risked their lives. You know, they all risked their lives. And so, you know, there I was with all these fabulous people, and all they just had to do was go, well, let's walk it through, you know, and have a look at it, and then go, well, let's go, you know. So if I ever get to direct another picture, I hope I'm so lucky.
It's about some guys who are misfits, I suppose, more or less. I mean, that's more what I retain from it. And it's those guys that are the grave diggers that the film's about. They're misfits from society, and they've found a brotherhood and a support in the environment that they're living in. But I don't know what a biker film is. I'd gone to England before it was made. I'd been working over here, and Sandy had been getting the thing together, and it was like you've got to be in this picture because we're going to be doing it, and that takes a long time to get something together. And I was selling stuff down at Paddy's Markets with a stall at the time that Sandy got the idea, and it was very good for somebody to a friend to come by and say, hey, we're going to make a picture, and you say, yeah, we're going to make a picture. And you sort of don't really believe that it's going to come off. Like, everyone's got ideas of making pictures and doing stuff. And this one did come off. And I said, yeah, I'll be in it. So I'd gone away and came back to do it. So I'd sort of said yes when we were doing the Paddy's stall. Then I came to England because I didn't know what else to do. There wasn't any other work coming up. And I'd been in work here. So all the time I was getting sort of letters saying, yeah, it's still happening, and then nothing, and then it's still happening. So whatever you're asking me was happening when I was somewhere else. And then I got the letter to say, it's on, be here. And so I was there because we'd agreed that, I was going to do it. It was a terrific time because everybody was devoted to the project. in a way that they're not in a lot of the other things I've done. You just come and do it as a job, and it just turned into so much more than just a job. It was fabulous. It's always an exciting time making a film, but as I say, the first thing you're making, which is coming out of people that, you know, your own friends, your own sort of peers are making a film. It's not working for some big company in a part that you've got from doing an audition or something like that. And yeah, it was fantastic. Sandy wrote it, directed it, acted in it, sold it, you know, and it's down to him. It's down to his energies, and he's made a winner because of the success of the film. It's not so much a rebel, it's just that he had an idea and he had the energy and the imagination to go for it and do it. And that's fantastic. I mean, a lot of people think, gee, I think I'd like to, or we should do, or let's go and do. But he really did it and got it together. And to pull the whole thing off with the industry and the state it was in, which was like no state, was just fantastic. And everybody who was in it did it because they had that feeling. They were sort of inspired to go through with it. And it was good. It was a communal thing. I mean, people were doing things because we were part of that commune. Well, it was an actors. Actors know other actors. People in business know other people in the same business. And that's sort of the way it evolved. And that was the energy behind it too. And the feeling on the set was, we're part of this commune. The commune is the Gravediggers, isn't it? I mean, that group of guys with the bikes, that is the commune, and that was the representation of it, I guess. The stuff I wore in it was stuff that I had. Like I told you about the market stall we had at Paddy's Market. Well, I used to do leather work for that. I used to make belts and trousers out of leather and stuff like that. So just that I was wearing stuff that I'd had about and used to wear as part of the stall sort of thing. That's all. It was just that the clothes that I had were clothes I had, and Sandy was happy for that to be in the film. That fitted the image, sort of thing. So we went with that. But there was no sort of thing, oh, you're going to do the leather work or stuff like that. You just do what you have to do on the day. And you don't sort of wait around if something has to be picked up for someone else to do it whose job it is. You say, yeah, you get under it and you give them a lift, you know. And it's the same with surf clubs and football teams and everybody. It's the same with all Australians, actually. With anything, like with a group of bikies or a film crew or a theatre crew, a theatre company, you do feel to be, you know, that's your family for the time of doing the job, and you're very loyal to it. And if someone's not feeling good about something, you don't sort of just turn your back on them and walk away. So things were shared. It was a communal sort of thing. You asked me just a while ago about the communal feeling of things. Well, that develops with any film or any theatre company. It's the same thing that keeps circus people together. Entertainers, you've got the same sort of problems of being out of work when you're not doing the job, and being happy because you're in work doing the job. And that unites you in a way that is very attractive, and there are a lot of loyalties sort of that make the job worthwhile. I suppose it happens in all other jobs too. Like, I can't imagine because I've only done acting. Living your role. You're living anyway. So you just use parts of what you're living. I don't know how everyone else works or what their thoughts are on things. Sure, the bikers look like the actors and the actors look like the bikers. That's acting. On behalf of the cast and on behalf of the guys who come there for the day. If they're asked to do something by somebody, they do it. And if that's living it, that's living it. There was a fight scene outside the pub. Guys rode up who we didn't know, and I didn't see any, I didn't see anything that I can sort of say to you, oh, this was a dangerous situation. There was always a sense of it, but it never got out of control. They're not there because they're being paid, and they're not there because someone's told them to be there. They're there because they want to be there, and so they do what they want to do, and it has to be kept. The trouble with making a film is you've got to do things at a certain time, and you've got to stop at a certain time. And so there's sort of like an edge of, are they going to stop or are they going to start? And as it worked, they did start and they did stop. And there were some times when it looked like they wouldn't stop. And that had to be stopped, but Sandy seemed to be in control of it. And they respected the fact that the film was being made. And if they hadn't liked the film, it wouldn't have gone on, because they wouldn't have stopped or started. So we're sort of like, it's happened, and we got away with it. It's in the film. I mean, he decides, even though he's had the shit beaten out of him, that, all right, it's an issue between them and me. In the terms of the guy who was killing them being saved by me at the last minute, when it was really it was their problem, he was their enemy, and I was the thing that was standing between them doing what they felt they had to do. So I paid not me, but the character paid the price of making that decision. But even after paying the price, he says, right, fair enough, that's it. That's the rules that I'm living in a world where those rules are important, but their rules are important too, and they're living in that world. And because of his exposure to them, because of the feelings that he'd had from living with them, he said, okay, we'll go with their rules, because that's what I've learnt from it. And so, yeah, he does. I suppose he becomes one of them by taking the punishment, you know. I think that's why he did it. I think he wanted their respect. And hopefully he got it. Hell of a price to pay, but I suppose a bit of what I'm saying is that the respect that Stone gets at the end of it, I think that's what would prompt him to make the choice he did, to say, no, don't call the cops. Leave it out, because it's another thing. It's outside that world, because the police are there to look after the other people and to protect us. We were all there. That day was fantastic, because Sandy put an ad in for anybody who's interested to come on. Well, who wouldn't be interested to go on a ride? Which is the last time I had anything to do with the run was, what, the 25th anniversary. We went back and we had a run. It's just fantastic. It's just wonderful. And it was the first time, really, after making the film, like 25 years earlier, that I had any inkling of the importance of the film and how the following of it and the love of it, the love of the whole thing. And the guys who went on the run up to Newcastle that day, they all had their families who had seen the film, because they were obviously part of the group that were doing the funeral run on the first run. And they've since had families, and they're all fans of the film. And it was just a very moving day to meet the numbers of people that were still sort of loyal to the film, liked the film, gave it that, and it was a very salutary thing, I think. I guess it was done outside the system, yeah, and it may have paid some sort of cost for that. I don't know. I can't really answer the question, because if you're asked to do something, you either do it or you don't. If you do it, you commit completely to it. And that's what everybody did who was part of it. We committed completely to it, and it has an organic thing that grows of itself. And part of that was spread amongst so many people who were there. As I said, the people who were in it originally, not just the actors, not just the small group, but the people who were involved in the runs and the subsequent runs that have been held, which I haven't been part of until the 25th anniversary one. they've all sort of added to it and given it a huge part in the hearts of everybody who was involved. I can't sort of answer what it gives the people, apart from the fact that it's given it, because when we had the run and people were invited to come and ride, the people turned up, because you turn up for a ride. That's a good thing. And over the years they've had families, and they've sort of been fans because of the effect that had. And I can't explain anything about the film, except that it's had a fantastic effect on the people who watched it, and the people who were part of it, and me and all the other people who were part of it. And I sort of don't sit around analysing it and why it's worked the way it has, but it has. It was great because it was Australian, as a film can be. It was about guys who were outside the incessant regulation and safety regulations that have been sort of beating us over the head ever since they've tried to stop paying money to fix people up, I suppose. I suppose in England it's to do with the national health, the whole sort of thing about helmet laws and seat belts and the bumps in the road and the traffic lights. Don't start me. But the bikers lived outside that environment, and that's what's so attractive to all Australians and all people, I suppose, who are sick of being nannied into submission and staying behind the guardrail, and come back, you might fall over the edge. We settled Australia on horses with no helmets, no seat belts. What Australians went through to sort of cope with that country, having come out from here, didn't have anything to do with safety regulations, which are sort of beating the shit out of us now, I think. With the run that I said I was on, the 25th anniversary, we had the death of one of the riders, and that's like shattering to everybody. But because of that, it's very hard. You've got to have insurance to sort of do it again, and that can't be got because of the situation. And risk-taking is a very low thing now with everybody. Fair enough, because there's a lot of risks in the world, and you just get the news every night and you think, well, I'm grateful, I suppose, for a lot of the safety things that have come in. And, I'll step down and say, well, fair enough in some circumstances. But it does sort of beat you down a bit, the constant sort of being careful by law, because you think you should be careful from common sense and from experience and stuff like that. So the memories of it are that we could do things then that we're not allowed to do now. And I hate that not allowed business. I just can't control it, can't do anything about it, so if you want to sort of keep out of trouble, you just obey. But the memories are great memories, and there's nothing specific apart from the fact that we all felt good about it, and we all lived through it, in a very good way. I don't know what to say about it. I just love it. I love it for having been part of it. I love it for its ongoing energy, and it's a thing that is part of my life because I was there, and part of everybody's life who was there. And it's down to Sandy for having brought it into existence, and for the success it's been. So it's part of my background.
Stone was the first job I did. I did a hair commercial, which was hugely successful and led to a part in a film, oddly enough. It was supposed to be a non-speaking part, but then the woman who was due to play the romantic lead, or the second romantic lead, pulled out because she thought the film was too violent. And so I naively stepped in and took the role of the leader of the Pax Mole. And that was really the beginning for me. And of course that film revolved around the sort of dope smoking scene. We had one extraordinary scene in that which took 25 hours to film. There were no unionists on set, of course, in those days. All underground, smoking real dope and doing a sort of reminiscing, a dream sequence, as it were. And so it was very different. It's funny that it's achieved a certain gravitas in the light of history. At the time, I have to say, didn't think it was great art. It seemed to be. I don't think I really understood whether there was any philosophical underpinning to it. It did seem to be a whole lot of people having a good time, but I guess it was trying to say that bikies are humans too. So that was the deeper line, if any. I think it really represented them, those bikie gangs that we were supposed to be fictionalising, but actually so many of them were involved. And I guess they thought it was a vindication of them in a way. But also, there are no other bikie films in Australia that are so sort of centred on the bikie world. So you could understand why they would hang on to it and with such love and commitment. It was supposed to be a brawl that ended up being a brawl, and it was quite chaotic. It was beyond the control, I think, of anybody. And I think we had our setup all worked out and choreographed, and then the bikies arrived, and I think some of them were probably already, well underway with whatever substances they were using, and so it did get messy and out of control. I think we finally did rein it in, but those of us, the innocents like me, sort of stood back and rather wide-eyed. It did have that sense of we were all in this together. Wherever we were at in our various roles, and certainly the people who were wearing the leathers and sitting up front on the bikes did take it on with a vengeance. It did seem that way. But it was as sexist in production, I guess, as the world that it was portraying. The women sat at the back, did as they were told, and the blokes seemed to have all the fun. I mean, it was a funny film because it was supposed to be truly representing a bikie gang, and yet every member of the gang that we were portraying rode a Kawasaki 900 with a special paint job. So there were, I don't know how many there were, 15 or 20, however many bikes there were. They were all sort of variations on the same theme. It certainly was very communal filmmaking, partly because we were all underpaid and overworked, so there was a sense that we were doing it more for love than money or career advancement. It certainly wouldn't, it's a bit like the Opera House, it wouldn't have been able to be made today because there would be too many restraints, implied by union rulings. We didn't break for the required numbers of, meal breaks or any of those sorts of things, and we certainly didn't have anything like a 10-hour turnaround after a 10-hour day. None of that prevailed at all. I think a lot of the quite gung-ho actors insisted on doing their own stunts, and so it broke a great many rules, and a lot of rules that were yet to be written. Most definitely it was made outside the system in a whole lot of ways. I mean, partly, as I said, because we were all smoking real dope, but also because I had a sense, and because it was the first thing I'd ever done, I had nothing to compare it to, but I had a sense that we were in large part making it up as we went along.
I was working in a theatre doing a play called Dimboola, and wearing a dinner suit every night. For 2 years I was in that play. But Sandy rang me and said, listen mate, I've got this film up, the motorcycle film, bikie film, I want you to play a bikie called Hooks, the Gang Perv, which suited me down to the ground. Everybody had a girl on the back of their bike, but I didn't. I had Dr. Death, Vince Gill on the back of my bike, but I chased all the other girls. You know, it was quite good. I didn't have to stick with one in the film, that is. But it was a bit strange, you know, rushing off to, or coming off the set looking like a bikie and then rushing down to the theatre and putting a dinner suit on and suddenly being a debonair as you could be in Dimboola. But yeah, that was a bit of a Rebels type of film, and we got a pretty bad name because we made it. But the film, as I said to the press once in Adelaide, I went down there to PR and I said to the press, you know, we make a film about World War II. I'm not going to go out and make World War III. You know, I make a film about bikies. I'm not going to suddenly turn into a killer or an idiot that, you know, bashes people up on the streets. I'm only acting, for God's sake. So, I mean, all this disaster about that was wrong. I mean, we did have real bikies in the film, admittedly, but I didn't know anything about the bikie culture at that time. Maybe I would have thought more about it had I known about the bikie culture, but even though I'd had a motorbike since I was 17, I'd never involved in the bikie scene as such. Oh, Sandy, arrogant, knew what he wanted, aggressive. Wasn't like that before, just an actor before that, just a friendly guy. But suddenly with the reins of the film, the role of director, producer, writer, it did go a little to his head, and he was very aggressive on set. Not that it worried me. I can take it or leave it, and let Sandy have his moment. But some of the guys got a bit upset about it. But Sandy was like a sergeant major in the army, really treated everybody with disrespect, shouted, screamed. The only time he didn't do it was when the Hells Angels turned up. He pulled his horns in pretty smartly then. But one thing I didn't know, as I said, was the culture, and the Hells Angels and all the other bikies that came in said, be careful of the big gravedigger. He's the only one with any class, and that was me. That was because I told them all they were poofters. I got on the balcony of the hotel in Balmain. I was a little unimpressed with the way everybody was revering them. And David Hannay said, listen, can you deliver the lunch to the bikies? I said, why? He said, well, I don't want to go near them, you know. And I had to deliver the lunches. And that's how we paid them. We paid them with lunch and beers. And, of course, they were like animals. They just dived on the lunches, but it didn't worry me. But I was just angry with the attitude that they had. So I got on the balcony of the hotel at Balmain and, you know, at the top of my voice shouted out, all the Hells Angels are poofters! And everybody went, oh, my God, he's going to get shot. But they respected me for it, you know. They loved me for it, you know. I was rehearsing the fight scene with the guy that I had to do the fight with. And part of the fight was he was to punch me, and me being supposedly so big that he didn't affect me. And he was just punching me, and I was standing there, hey, come on, what do you got, what do you got? And then I turned around, gave him a whack, picked him up, threw him into the back of a ute, which had a mattress in there. One of the Hells Angels, Black Mac by name, saw this and thought, oh, who does he think he is? So he come along and grabbed me and picked me up and threw me into the ute myself. But he didn't throw me hard or far enough like he should have, and I caught my shins on the edge of the ute as I fell in and ripped all my shins open. Well, I leapt out of that van and, you know, I was just about to deck the guy, and he instead of putting his jukes up to have a go, he said, you're going to hit me? Like he was so amazed that I was about to deck him. And I said, yes, I am. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw this surge of bodies coming towards me, and I said, if I do hit you, will this bunch of animals sink the boots into me? He said, yeah, that's right. And I said, right, well, consider yourself hit. So that's when he thought, this is a friend, so I couldn't get rid of him. He came to my flat for a fortnight. He wouldn't leave my flat for a fortnight, and he still had the makeup on from the movie. God, I couldn't get rid of him. But years later, I think it was the 25th anniversary, I meet this guy, very sweet-looking guy. Hello, Roger, how are you? I said, hi. Have we met before? He said, yeah. Black Mac, how are you? I said, what's happened to you? He said, I've turned religious. And he had a woman with him, and he was holding a chair and opening car doors for her. Total change in the man, total absolute gentleman. You know, I couldn't believe it. To repay the bikies, apart from lunch and a few beers, they took them out to a hotel and bought them beers. And from what I can gather, I was safely in Dimboola that night wearing my tuxedo, so I wasn't there, thankfully. But apparently they went berserk that night and just bashed up everybody in sight. And Hannay, I remember complaining about having to clean the blood off the walls of the hotel. The hotel owners said, you know, you're responsible for this, so you've got to clean the hotel up. And there was actually blood all over the walls and bits of hair. So I don't know what happened that night, but I know it was pretty disastrous. I do recall one day lining up in North Sydney, the whole bunch of us, filming. The cameras were going, and one of the guys that played in Dimboola with me that night, when we got to the theatre that night, he said, "Oh my God," he said, "you should have been in North Sydney this afternoon." I said, "Why?" He said, "Oh, all these bikies were over there, man. Oh, I was so scared, you know." He said, "I thought they were going to attack us and smash the cars up." I said, "Mate, that was us." He said, "Oh my God." He didn't know. I mean, that impressed him so much that all these bikies were there in North Sydney. And so that was the sort of effect that the bikie scene had. We'd all come from our various homes and rendezvous like flock of birds, you know, like in Hitchcock's film, the birds. We'd be rendezvousing, say we're heading across the other side of the harbour. And just for the time we had to start work, most of us were sort of rendezvousing at the edge of the bridge together, just enough we went across the bridge. I remember one morning I was with Hugh Keys-Bourne and my speedo didn't work. And we're speeding across the bridge together. And I said to Hugh, "What are we doing?" You know, what speed? He said, 150. You know, it was only kilometres, but I mean, you know, I remember saying, you know, and we were doing 150 k's over the bridge. I thought, oh my God. And, but yeah, we had a sort of a clan because we did work together very well. And a lot of them did sleep and live together, but I didn't because, as I say, I had to go to the theatre every night and I sort of lost that communication of a night. The bikie funeral procession was quite an event to be a part of. You see, unfortunately, I made so many films in that period. I went from one film to the other, that I never really looked upon any of those films as a historical moment in my life because I knew there'd be another one around the corner. Like today, if I was offered a film, I'd savour it. I'd love it. But in those days, we were just making so many films that you just took it as part of your everyday life. And so I didn't savour the moment as much as I should have. But I do remember it, and seeing it on film now, it's a great moment. And I'm about third or fourth in the line. And when you realise how long that line is, it's quite a moment to look at, particularly on film, because I couldn't see it looking back over my shoulder. But yeah, it was a great moment. People who are bikies are part of a family. They look upon that as their family. So therefore, to them, this is a family film. This is a film about themselves. This is themselves they see on screen, and they identify with either me or Sandy or Hugh or Dr. Death maybe. But they identify with those guys, and they feel as though they can do those things that we did on the film. And even my own brother who rides a bike said to me, "Boy, I love the way you took that corner." I mean, my own brother who knows me like a brother would, but he was impressed by the way I took a corner on my motorbike because we were growing up together on motorbikes. And so that's the way the bikies look at things, you know. "Wow, did you see the way he handled that? Did you see the way he rose the back wheel?" And I was in Adelaide for the PR. I did the PR, actually created the PR for Sandy. And I went around to the bikie pubs and said to bikies, "Listen, Sandy Harbutt, the director of the film Stone's arriving in the airport tomorrow morning. Can you make it?" "Oh, man, can I make it?" "Oh, yeah, man." I ended up having about 300 bikies at the Adelaide airport when Sandy arrived. He got off the plane, he couldn't believe it. And we had one guy that rode a Douglas on the back wheel, very slow. He just picked the Douglas up, massive bike it was, 1000cc, and he just rode so slowly on the back wheel. And Sandy got them all together. Sandy suddenly was a director. "Hey, man, you could do this, you do that." Next thing we had a lineup of cars, motorbikes, and the guy in the Douglas just sitting on the back wheel, and the press from everywhere going berserk. And it was a great PR for Adelaide. And so, you know, bikies the world over look at that as part of themselves, you know. I was very cautious about the nude stuff. I knew we had to do a nude scene, and always a bit worried about doing a nude scene, although during that period we were always taking our clothes off. I don't know why, but we were. And I happened to be doing a couple of other films that needed my clothes off. Sometimes in the day, when I wasn't working on Stone, I went up and made a couple of home movies that I had to take my gear off for. So I was pretty used to taking my clothes off, although with this new clan of people, I was a bit wary, and we all slept together that night, and in the morning we had to be there at daybreak to take our gear off. So we were waiting for the sun to rise, and I thought, God, it's got to happen sooner or later. So I dropped my gear in amongst the crowd. There's about 40 of us there. and I was just standing there stark bollocky naked in the dark, and all of a sudden one of the girls said, "Oh my God, Roger's got his gear off." Everybody said, "Wow, right, Wardy's got his rip off." Next thing, we were all stark bollocky naked, and the sun came up, and there we were, ready to go. Get the cameras rolling, baby. Everybody was starkers, and we jumped in the water, and oh my God, you should see what was happening in that water. It was great.
Sandy was quite a contradiction in the sense that he went through the advertising industry and made commercials before he made Stone. And at the point where I met Sandy, he had very much committed to, I guess, the rebellious arc of his career. And I think Stone was philosophically something that he would embrace, I mean, for the rest of his life, I guess. Several of the sequences that we shot for Stone involved the Hells Angels, and there were a number of days where, you know, a certain level of threat was quite palpable on the filming. One of them was we shot a fight sequence outside the old 4th and Clyde in Balmain, and Sandy decided to use the opposing team, bikie gang, that confronted the gravediggers. He decided to make them the Hells Angels, and the remuneration for the Hells Angels, unfortunately, was in beer. On wrap, the Hells Angels decided, in fact, to hang around and encourage the rest of the day's filming. And I think, if I remember rightly, the production manager, which was Lex Meredith, was given the task of decoying the Hells Angels, and he took them off to another hotel to distract them. Shortly after they left and we resumed shooting, we were told that they were, in fact, returning to the set. And I remember now that the 4th and Clyde became sort of a Eureka Stockade situation. I mean, people took refuge in upstairs rooms. I mean, we had a whole bevy of young actresses, which, of course, were probably the intended objective of the Hells Angels. And I remember the girls were taken upstairs. The crew found various places to hold up. I think at the outset, when we knew that the Hells Angels were on their way back, Sandy made a little speech, and it went something like, "Let's just act normal, let's keep shooting, and they'll get bored," you know, which people often do with the filming process. And they did. We hid the girls. They came back. There was a standoff when I'm trying to remember because it's so long ago now. But one of the most fearsome of the Hells Angels was a guy called Guitar Zan, and Guitar Zan, I think, had a very big bushy beard and every second tooth missing. And I remember he came up to me at one point, and I was trying to look like I was deeply ensconced in a game of snooker, and I had the cue, unfortunately, in my hand, and I suddenly realised as he reached for the cue that just a few years prior, of course, there was the Rolling Stones concert where the Hells Angels had become legendary for use of a billiard cue. So I didn't resist Guitar Zan. He took the cue off me and told me basically to fuck off, and which I did. But gradually, I think Sandy was right. They got bored and they sort of dispersed in the end. But there was a certain amount of tension working with them because, you know, they were very much the epitome of what Sandy was trying to capture, you know, total rebelliousness and threat. Stone had a very communal feeling from the outset. I remember the pre-shoot drinks at Ross Wood Productions down in Paddington, that cast, crew, you know, production office staff were almost, you know, inseparable. You couldn't pick them apart. Sandy also had a financial philosophy, which was basically that everybody got paid $200 a week. So it had a quite kibbutz communal kind of feeling about it. As an example of that, we were shooting a scene in the Gravediggers headquarters, which was situated in Middle Harbour, or Middle Head, has a old fortress rooms, subterranean fortress rooms. And we started shooting the sequences in that location, I think on a 7:30 call or whatever it was on a Friday morning. And we had to get them done before we left. I think we finally wrapped at about 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. You wouldn't get that sort of, you know, shooting continuum unless you had that sort of atmosphere. Stone was quite unique from my experience in filmmaking. The line between the reality of the film and our day-to-day reality was very blurred, and to the great benefit of the film, I think. The ensemble of actors that played the Gravediggers very much embraced the reality of becoming a bikie gang. I think they did a lot of extracurricular, you know, living and writing to get into that. And there was a certain amount of method approach to the acting. I mean, a lot of them were probably less experienced actors, say, in comparison to Hugh Keys-Byrne. Hugh, who played Toad, also very much became that character. I recall a situation, a sequence shot in the Forth and Clyde involved Hugh monstering a couple of patrons, and at a certain point he pulls out a 2-foot-long Bowie knife and tends to stick it under the chin of the guy. And one of my roles in the film was to be on set as the editor on set, to be of assistance to Sandy in terms of cutting patterns and things like that. And it wasn't exactly a full-time job, so I'd find myself often standing in for various actors. On this particular occasion, I found myself standing in for this patron who unfortunately crossed Hugh Keys-Byrne. And I was quite intrigued at the time because around about then I was sort of studying acting with a great old acting guru called Brian Siren at the time. And I was quite intrigued to be on the receiving end of Hugh's performance, particularly when he stuck the Bowie knife under my chin and he said, if you move, I'll cut your fucking head off. And I was quite convinced of his intent. And subsequent to those rehearsals, or in fact shooting that sequence, I found myself with Hugh, and I really was so intrigued by the credibility of his performance. I said to Hugh, you know, when you said that thing about cutting my head off, and you know, I got the real feeling that you would have if I'd moved. And he said, I would have. And I thought, okay, digested that for a moment, and I went back to him and said, look, Hugh, just say, you know, I had to move. He said, I would have cut your fucking head off. And a little while later, I had a third go. I just like to be convinced. I said, hey, Hugh, if I'd slipped or something, an accident, he said, I would have cut your fucking head off. And I started to understand, you know, how incredibly important it is not to fracture the actor's reality. Another incident I recall in regard to the substances was the sequence we shot in the Casemates, as it was called, the underground dungeon, where Sandy shot a 360-degree pan following a very big reefer around every member of the gravediggers. That particular night, I don't know how many takes we did, but the air was, you know, we didn't need a smoke machine, and the crew were behaving in a fairly interesting way. Also, we were using a famous bomb sights doctored up lens that Ross Wood created, which consisted of a couple of handles on two elements, which Nixon Binney would operate to create distortion, in-camera distortion. And that effect was obviously, I think, enhanced by Nixon's passive smoking on the evening. I remember an actor called Dewey Hungerford, who was in fact Ty Harden's brother. And Dewey was a big Texan guy with a big red beard. He, at a certain point, was sitting under a lamp that was unfortunately a little too precariously placed on a ledge above Dewey, and at a certain point I think the reef had come to him and he took a very big drag. At the same time, this lamp, quite heavy cast iron housing, came down and bounced off his forehead. And I still remember Dewey taking the reefer out of his mouth and just looking at it like, that, man, what a hit, you know. So yeah, I think everybody partook, whether they willingly or unwillingly. The funeral procession sequence, which is a wonderful visual sequence because it was shot not long after the freeway was open, and all the excavated canyons are looking golden and sparkly, and it's they're great images to cut together. A great logistic feat. We had probably about 5 camera positions working simultaneously. Had camera vehicles. I think we got 2 runs at the stretch, a lot of the stretch, and we had to get the footage in those 2 runs, and then it was over. But so it was quite a you know, a logistical kind of feat, given that it was before the era of mobile phones and you know, limited two-way radios and things like that. Also, obviously, there are many, many extras in that sequence, which were basically bikers who responded to advertisements before the event and celebrated with total gusto. In the opening of Stone, there's a montage of gravediggers coming to grisly ends, and one of them was involved a jump off one of the cliffs into Sydney Harbour. Peter Armstrong put that together, built the ramp, obviously, and you know, there's a lot of tension involved in shooting that because indeed it turned out to be a world record at the time, and also, you know, there was obviously dangers involved in getting the propulsion and the speed off that ramp. Took the jump, and there was a very tense moment when basically Peter hit the water and thankfully separated from the bike, and then he just floated on the surface. He was unconscious, and they got in and picked him up. But from that point, when obviously he hit the water like a brick wall, like concrete, floating motionless, to getting him up onto the boat, there was quite a lot of tension in terms of, you know, had he, you know, taken it too far. I think Stone resonates with audiences because partly to do with the kind of energy that comes out of some of the things that we've talked about in terms of the unusual communal way of making the film. I think it resonates with the audience just on a universal level in terms of it's a trip into alternative culture, anarchy, rebellion. I think bikie, Sandy obviously from the very beginning understood that subculture movies are quite intriguing to mainstream audiences, and you know, the bikie culture is in fact very foremost of those alternative cultures because they live with us in, you know, our very civilised context, and you know, when you glimpse them, they represent something, I guess, that's almost primal. You know, it's tribal with technology.
When I first met Sandy, which was at Channel 7 in 1967, he was straight, if you will. I mean, straight externally. I mean, he certainly, when I got to know him, wasn't straight internally. Was he a rebel? I think he was somebody who used the situation of what he grew up with. I mean, he was an agency producer at McCann Erickson. He was worked with Michael Robinson there. They were kind of having, I mean, he drove a Jag. He had expensive tastes. That's Sandy in the early 60s, and he moved inexorably away from that. But that was how he, I mean, he was certainly like to project success and a degree of well-to-doness, if you will, as a young person. And then he just kind of changed. I mean, from my point of view, he's unquestionably the most inspirational person I've ever worked with. I've never been stretched or pushed or made to, you know, go to the edge of the cliff and look over and see whether I could jump off, the way Sandy did. I mean, he was an extraordinary person. I mean, he and I, of course, in the setup for the film, spent years working together and with Michael Robinson, who, of course, co-wrote the screenplay. So for a long time, from 1970 through till shooting the picture in 73, it was just like the three of us. And that was interesting because Michael didn't like me. And I didn't really like him all that much either. So there was this kind of... and there was that lot of that between Sandy and I need to point out, you know. I mean, Sandy and I didn't necessarily always get on. That's an understatement. There were times at which we didn't not just get on. I mean, we were, you know, emotionally and physically violent towards each other. Not to any, you know, extent of great difficulty, but there was always an edge there. But there was no question that of all the people that I have worked with in my life, that he is the standout person. He was the person who actually made me do what I didn't think I could do, and then I could do it. And then I could do it for the rest of my life in film because I didn't have any fear anymore. That's the thing that Sandy gave me, took away my fear by making me address my fear. I mean, there were times while we were making the picture, I thought, we're going to fuck up. There's going to be a disaster. It was a roller coaster ride because there were so few of us doing so many different things, including Sandy. I mean, goodness me. If anybody deserves the title auteur in Australian film, he is the only one person. Writer, producer, director, designer, lyricist and star. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he's up there with Warren Beatty, for me. And it's an absolute tragedy that he never made another picture. I mean, and there are many reasons for that, but it's my failure to help him get something happening, great failure, the biggest failure of my life. That makes me so fucking angry I can't begin to tell you. But also Sandy's inability to compromise or back off from people who kind of found him frightening. Well, you know, I found him frightening from time to time, but I was prepared to go toe-to-toe with him. But, you know, he wouldn't back off and he wouldn't compromise and he gave people the shits and he made people frightened, and people don't want to work with somebody who makes them frightened. That's part of why Sandy never made another film. If you frighten somebody, they don't want to know you. And Sandy frightened people. And he didn't intend to frighten people, I hasten to point out, but there was something about him when he got passionately, obsessively involved, that could be frightening. He frightened the crap out of me on the odd occasion, but I was just going on the trip. It was a political film, intensely political. It was about Vietnam veterans who came back home and were alienated by the society for whom they'd fought, whether they'd been there as professionals or volunteers or conscript was not the point. They came back to a country that vilified them. So they had no choice but to choose to be outlaws. That's the political underpinning of the film. If the film had just been a bike movie, would it, all these years later, still resonate? Of course not. It would have just been another, exploitation film. But the intensity of the politics was clear. When we started to work on it in 1970, of course, we were heavily embroiled in Vietnam. By the time the picture got shot in 1973, we were out of Vietnam because, one of the great things he did, Whitlam took us out of Vietnam. The opening scene, which is about an environmental politician, was originally going to be about an anti-Vietnam War politician. But the setup of the film was political. If we'd made it before, Whitlam had become Prime Minister, it would have still been an anti-Vietnam rally. It was still, absolutely appropriate then and now that it was a rally about the environment. How important is the picture historically? Intensely important. You can't, I mean, when I'm driving down a road and I see one of the guys from the Vietnam Veterans Motorcycle Club going past with the patch from the film on his back, my heart soars like a bird. The political resonance is still there. When I looked at what Richard Kuipers did in Stone Forever, and there's those guys talking about how important the picture was, and one of the guys, Spike, I think it was, one of the vets, said if it hadn't been for Stone, he would have topped himself. Well, if all we did was save one man's life, that was a great social achievement. The amazing thing about making the film, and God did we need their help and their support, was the complete and total support we got from the New South Wales Police Force. Given that the picture was at times quite critical and even held them up to ridicule. But they knew what they were doing because they knew we were addressing the totality of people's lives. That is again another thing that makes Stone resonate, is that it's about these people, not as stereotypes, but as human beings. The two sets of bikers who were in the film were the Hells Angels, and the only other people that the Hells Angels would have was the Lone Wolf. So they were the two. They constituted that big day, playing the Black Hawks at the Forth and Clyde. I remember going to see Bob Howard at the AFDC, who was the then funding body, and we had to get him to sign off on everything we did. And I thought it would be both humorous and appropriate to go in with this invoice, which basically said dope, Hells Angels, and how much I'd had to pay for it. And he looks at this. He said, we can't do this. I said, Bob, we have to, because that's what I paid them with. Had a huge garbage bag full of dope and many, many slabs of beer, which disappeared in about 30 seconds. That day, the police sat up sort of on the top of the escarpment at Balmain and sent this poor guy who worked in the PR department. Normally he didn't wear a uniform, but he had to come down in his uniform, stand there and hang about with us, and all of the Hells Angels and the Lone Wolf and whomsoever. And that was quite funny, I mean, because they were kind of having a go at him, you know, sort of Angel would come up and sort of blow smoke into the cop's face, and then, you know, another one would come out and flip out the old fellow and piss on his boots, and he had to deal with all that. He dealt with it beautifully, and there's the guys up from all the other cops looking down with their field glasses, laughing a lot about what this poor bastard from the PR in his uniform. I was standing inside with all the angels and what have you, and Roger Ward comes out onto the balcony of the Forth and Clyde, and he's got this wonderful, I mean, Roger's magnificent, the huge-looking guy anyway, and he with the best smile in the world, this great smile comes up. All Hell's Angels are pufters. That was a moment that I thought we were going to be dead. But they just laughed. And the reason they laughed is they thought he was really tough. They really thought that Roger was a killer. I mean, they saw it in his eyes that he could do it. And they respected him for that. I went round the corner with the Hells Angels to the dry dock to spend the afternoon with them after we'd finished the shoot and buy them a few beers and have a bit of a chat. And there was some guy in the hotel in the dry dock who kind of was giving them a bad time, and they were trying to ignore him. And you know, he was going, you're so fucking weak as a fortnight, and stuff like that. And eventually one of them said, look, I think it was Tarzan said to Jan, the president, I mean, do we have to put up with this any longer? And Jan said no. So they took his scalp off. I mean, I've never seen so much blood in my life. It was all over the ceiling and all over the walls. But, you know, I mean, that was the only thing that really happened. From my point of view, it was perfectly justifiable. This guy was behaving like a complete prick, and they put up with him for as long as they thought was reasonable, and then they beat the crap out of him. But as far as where we were on location, they were never anything other than supportive actually on the location. I mean, what they... and they were very disciplined. Sandy used to say to anybody who turned up to support us to make the film, please behave coming and going. You know, at least, you know, don't do anything inappropriate within about 10k of the location, because it will reflect badly on us and on the culture. And they were, look, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, yes, there were times when one was frightened. I mean, one would have been really stupid not to be frightened. But they were incredibly supportive. And, you know, I mean, I can remember years later, you know, I mean, it was some Christmas, and Sandy was coming around. He looked at one of the Christmas cards, and it was, you know, from our house to your house. And he said, do they know where you live? And I said, well, yes. I mean, I get the Christmas card. He said, they don't know where I live. And I thought, oh, okay. I felt confident that we had represented the culture so well, and that was absolutely Sandy as a filmmaker, that we were never going to get anything other than respect and from them, because we'd given them respect. The picture was called Stone. The culture of the picture was very drug-oriented. Was there a lot of dope smoking? Yes, there was, but not necessarily in the sense that it got in the way of the making of the film. Only as it was complementary to making the film. That picture, which is huge, was made for $195,000. If we had not been disciplined, we couldn't have done it. If everybody hadn't been pulling their weight, we couldn't have done it. If at the end of a day we all sat round and got rat-assed, well, that's fine too. Nobody had been hurt on the shoot, no matter how things had been pushed, and we were really manic about nobody being hurt. So that, again, that was part of being disciplined, doing everything very well, so that even the most outrageous action sequences, there was no danger to the human being. And Peter, of course, was the stunt coordinator, the only person in my knowledge from the position of being a stuntman that ever owned a piece of a movie. He deserved every penny. Out there, and Sandy and I, we looked down over the edge of the cliff there and go, oh no, he can't do this. This is ridiculous. He'll kill himself. And we'd go back and say, okay, we're not going to do it. And Peter would say, I have to do it. I've got to do this. I know I can do it. I can do it. You've got to do it. Let me do it. Anyhow, the day of doing it, holy shit. What was Peter Armstrong? He was a great stuntman. He was a physicist. He was a mathematician. He was an actor. All those things had to come together so he got it right. I mean, he had to measure the trajectory because there was rocks at the surface for, I don't know, 75 metres out. The cliff was about, 70-odd metres. So he built a ramp, mathematical precision, that was yay long with the right ramping, so that by the time he got to the end of the ramp, he was in the right trajectory to get to the point that the bike would go beyond the rocks, so he wouldn't come crashing down onto the rocks. Okay, well there's the mathematics, there's the physics. So he gets out there, and he then becomes an actor. He didn't go, oh well, the easiest thing to do now is to dive, or I'm going. He acted a man dying. He was fighting through the air. But he still had to, when he got down onto the water, hit the water in such a manner that he wouldn't hurt himself, or wouldn't kill himself. Because the water, when you're coming down from that height, is like hitting concrete. So he had to do that. I mean, it is without question the most extraordinary piece of work that one could possibly have imagined being involved with. I'm never going to forget that day as long as I live. And of course, I mean, we're all standing back and waiting for because obviously we couldn't see over the edge. Nobody could rush up and have a look because, you know, we had to wait until all the cameras had finished shooting their particular part of the sequence. And then we ran up to the edge when it was all finished, and there he was lying on his back in the water. I'm just kind of standing there, howling like a baby, with relief, because he moved, he put up his hand. Because I was just, I mean, I don't think, we were all terrified that he was going to kill himself. If I can go back to what I said about Sandy before, how he was so inspirational. He just had this an extraordinary ability to pull a group of people together and take them in one direction. I mean, his direction. I mean, as I said, he's very much an auteur. It was his film. We were all there working on his picture. But he then made it our picture. I mean, we were all contributors, and that was one of the great things about his ability to make the film. And I mean, and playing the Undertaker was the perfect place for him to be, because the Undertaker was the leader of the Gravediggers, and Sandy was the leader of the film. So he was in the right physical position. He was inside the ensemble, making the ensemble work from the interior, not on the outside, you know, giving orders or anything. In fact, I mean, he didn't give orders at all. I mean, he could get really pissed off, he could get angry, he could get very emotional, he could get whatever he was, but there was no suggestion about him giving orders. I mean, as Rebecca Gilling has said, she didn't get any sense of him necessarily being the director, because of her relationship was being the Undertaker's girlfriend. So she went on that trip with him. That was her trip, being the Undertaker's girlfriend. Had no sense of being directed. But that was her first film, and of course she was being directed. You know, everybody came together to do the job. I mean, and there were people who did all kinds of things. I mean, there was a point at which we needed to dig Godow's grave, the vertical grave, and I'm kind of thinking, I don't have anybody to do it. And Hugh Keysburn wasn't shooting that day, and he just came in, and I said, and he said, I'll go and do it. Hugh Keysburn went out and dug the hole in the ground. From the entire picture, whenever he wasn't on screen being docked to death, Vincent Gill was assistant grip. I mean, Helen Morse was wardrobe. I mean, everybody had more than one function. So numerous functions, and of course, all led by Sandy having all of the functions that Sandy had. I mean, Rebecca talking about the 25-hour days. I mean, they happened at the end of weeks because we had to get out of locations, you know, and so we just kept working. But I mean, after the 25 hours had finished, did everybody go home? No. We all, you know, the people went off and got slabs of beer, and we set up the barbecue and sat around reading the Sunday papers and smoking the dope and having a good time. I mean, we didn't go home necessarily. Even after the longest day, because it's in my head, 27 and a half hours. So we could get out of the casements. That was that day, that location. Great location. That's another thing. Look, Sandy and I looking like, you know, Cousin It. I mean, animals. We went to Chowder Bay and met with the major in charge, and he gave us all these things. Why? Because we were able to share a passion for something. And we talked to him, obviously, about the fact that these film was about Vietnam vets who'd been alienated. I mean, this is a really straight down the line major commanding Chowder Bay. We got everything from them. We got power generators. We got the location. I mean, there is a group of people who are on the radical edge, getting the New South Wales Police Force and the Army to support them to make their picture. That's pretty extraordinary. And I guess we presented passion, we presented discipline, and they knew we weren't going to, bugger around, get it wrong. Well, we didn't get it wrong. We got it right, obviously. There it is, all these years later, and it's still cooking.